Hi, my name is John, and I want to tell you about my BI life. A slightly unusual coming out story, you could say. When I was 17, I decided I was gay. As a kid, I'd larked around at school with other male friends, you know, we all did, and I thought very little of it. But it was when I was 17, I became aware that my friends were all getting very interested in girls, and I wasn't. If anything, I was getting more interested in fellows. And there was one experience in particular. I was watching a gym competition, and there was one lad wearing just gym trunks, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. I found his body absolutely bewitching. Now, I didn't know what to do about it. It wasn't a sexual experience, but I knew it was something that was very important for me. But at that time, this was the 1940s, you know, very, very little was said about gayness. In fact, that term didn't exist. This was homosexuality, but very little was said about that either. And of course, any kind of homosexual activity was, for males, was illegal and could be quite heavily punished. So I kept it to myself. There were very few people. I couldn't think of anybody I could really talk to about this. Later in my teens, I became quite religious, and in fact became a minister and a missionary, and went out to India. And India was a real eye-opener, because there I discovered that fellows wearing very little would go around with their arms around each other's shoulders, holding hands. And you know, this is something that never happened in Britain. And I thought, how nice. And then in the villages, and I was working in the villages at that time, I discovered that all the children up to the age of puberty went around stark naked. I thought this was perfectly innocent, you know, it was just because of the climate. But then I had one or two experiences of seeing little boys being wanked by older men in the village. And this was done quite openly. Everybody could see what was going on, and nobody seemed bothered at all. I seemed to be the only person who was even noticing. I thought, this is amazing. And I decided to see what I could find about the way that this worked out. You know, and I looked very carefully at the lives of young fellows and adult males, to see what effect this kind of upbringing had on them. And I decided that it had a very benign effect, because they seemed much pleasanter than the kind of males I'd grown up with. They were very open, very spontaneous, very uninhibited with each other. They were all going to get married, but they weren't going to fall in love probably. Their marriages were going to be arranged by their parents. When I started talking with young fellows, I discovered that it didn't occur to them that sex was something only for marriage. They saw no point at all in our distinction between homosexual and heterosexual. You know, if you liked somebody, then it might very well become in some way a sexual thing. And so India really affected me quite a lot. However, it didn't do much for me personally, because I was a Christian. I was committed to the Christian view of monogamy, you know, chastity before marriage, and sex only within marriage. And I felt really very inhibited. But eventually I got tuberculosis and went into a sanatorium, and a girl I met on the boat, also a missionary, she'd gone as a social worker to Sri Lanka, started writing to me, and I responded. And as we wrote to each other, I remembered that when I first saw her on the boat, I thought what an attractive girl she was. You know, the sort of girl that I might very well have tried to marry if I could, you know, but for me, I thought marriage was out of bounds, so, you know, it hadn't entered my head. But now we were writing to each other and getting to know each other a lot better, I think we were both feeling that really we were very attracted to each other. And in the end, I decided I would write to Margaret and tell her about my gayness and about my experience up to that point, and how I was now feeling, and how would she feel if we sort of scouted the idea of becoming engaged. Now I expected a nil return. You know, I thought she would be. We should rule this out of bounds altogether, because you know, I mean, what sort of chance was there with a chap who was predominantly gay? However, her reaction was quite different. She was very sympathetic, and the result was we fell in love, we got married. We've been married for over 50 years. We now have 2 grown daughters. We have 3 grandsons and a granddaughter. And you might think that was the whole story, and that's what we expected would be the case when we got married. If sex had worked out, I thought, well, you know, the other thing would just sort of drop out. But that's not what happened. What happened was after a year or two, I began to feel that I had to try to find some way of relating sexually to a man as well as to my wife. It wasn't at all that I was thinking of opting out of the marriage, but I didn't at all see why something like this shouldn't coexist with a marriage. And the result of that, I have to be very brief because I'm only allowed 10 minutes, but the result of that was that eventually, it didn't happen quickly, but after a lot of false starts and so on, I found a number of guys with whom I could have a steady relationship for a period, and eventually a young fellow, much younger than myself, with whom I had a relationship for over 20 years, and then along with that a relationship with a chap for over 5 years, and lots of very rewarding one-off sessions with chaps I met on a beach. So that's my BI life, and believe me, it has made all the sense in the world to me, because it's only by being bisexual I feel I can be a complete person.